Welcome to Houston Sports Talk with your host, Robert Land.
Thanks for checking into the best Houston sports podcast, part of the National Bleav Network. And joining me to talk Astros is our old friend from Astros Future. It's co-host Kenny Van Doren. Always a pleasure, Kenny. And thank goodness the Astros got out of that jinxed Minute Maid because they're winning at home at Daikin Park. New ballpark, new winning, right?
Yeah, who would have thought? I mean, the whole issue the last couple of years was never winning at home for this ball club, and coming in with a sweep against an A's team that's playing better than recent years is always a good sign, especially when you get the news this morning that one of your starting pitchers is going out with Tommy John surgery.
Yeah, we'll get to the starting pitching issues right off the bat because the fans, I think, get distracted at times by the offense, although it's starting to come around as we're seeing. But the real worry is the starting pitching injuries. That's the only thing that's really scared me this year. 60% of the opening day starting pitchers, of course, out. Wisniewski, Blanco out for the season. Arrighetti probably gone another month with the ramp up, and he's pitching off, flat ground, but whatever. All of a sudden, there's huge pressure, Kenny, on Lance McCullers' comeback. So what have you seen from McCullers' starts so far?
Yeah, it's like with each one, it just gets deeper and deeper, which you kind of expect for a guy who hasn't pitched competitively in 2 years. Even when you look at the longer, outings that he's making and just the better he's getting. The quality start today, 12 strikeouts, first time he's done that since 2022, of course. Last time he was really just in that starting role. And even that year, he was coming back from an injury. So just over time, and it's exactly what you wanted to see in response today. I think one of the biggest things that was probably lost about Lance the last couple of years, just with him being out with injuries, is that he's a gamer. I mean, the guy pitches off of feel. He pitches off of, emotion and everything that he's done like that in years past, just in the postseason, most certainly as well. But with each outing, this is the first time he's, finished the fifth inning, but, finished the sixth as well. So 20 strikeouts over his last 10 and a third. You're looking at like 2018 and 2017 Lance McCullers. This is what you want to see, back in that rotation, especially when you have injuries like this. They're going to have to lean back on a guy who's 31 now. It's still kind of, hard to believe that he's only 31, just, how long he's been out of it. But, everything's looking a lot stronger, a lot sharper as he goes through it. And one of the biggest things that's just really standing out to me these last couple starts too, 3 walks in the first 2 games out, and that second outing against Cincinnati, didn't even finish the first inning. But once you kind of look past those, 1 walk, 3 walks, 1 walk, he's limiting base runners at the same time. And I think that's massive just from a competitive nature as well, just what he's been able to do these last couple of years. And as you see more guys go out with injuries, it's, kind of ironic, with the one guy you can count on is the one that's, been out the last 2 years with injuries, out of his control. But it's a rotation that just continues to take hits. And the one guy that's, taking the most hits is starting to, turn into what he used to be.
Yeah, well, you can count on him for 4 or 5 innings. I want to see him hit 6 consistent innings because that was a problem, as we know, throughout Lance's career. And later in the show, I got to get your thoughts on the rookie starters. But Kenny, how about the feel-good story of the season, Jake Meyers? And you saw what Meyers projected to be in the Astros system. Is this surprising to you, and is it sustainable?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is surprising. I think anyone that doesn't say that, is lying. You look at guys that have great spring trainings the last couple of years, like even Yuli's last great spring training with the Astros, very down season after winning the batting title. Miles Straw a couple of years ago had a pretty great spring training. So you run into some guys that, have some great feels in spring training. They're hitting the ball well. They're playing defense well. Everything's kind of ticking up. I don't think Jake's numbers are really jumping off the page at you, but, sometimes these guys have great feels and it just doesn't translate. It feels like, it's just a flick of a switch. I mean, it's like he's a different player out there. And you were getting to the point coming into this year and next year, you're looking at 2 guys like Jake Meyers, Chas McCormick. You have other outfielders coming up behind them. You're still waiting on Jacob Melton. You're waiting on other guys to really break through. And it feels like this minor league system was very top heavy with outfielders for a while and no one really developed. At the same time, guys like Chas McCormick and Jake Meyers stuck around. But I think everyone is very surprised. I don't think it's going to be something where Jake, carries this over for the next 5 seasons. I think a lot of people remember 2021, he just turned into a monster at AAA. He wasn't even ranked by a lot of these prospect outlets, came out of nowhere after the COVID ended season and just, turned into an offensive, slugger, which wasn't really his calling card throughout that time. But, even just looking back the past couple of years, only 49 games in that first rookie season, he's, hitting around the same numbers. So the slugging was a little bit better that year of 54 games. So a little bit comparable with 761 OPS in 2021, 760 this year. Look back at the last couple of years, the guy never broke 700. I think this is something that he could probably hold on to more as, a contact hitter and what he's been able to do and, find power when he can. But at the same time, it is something that you have to be excited about just with the trajectory of where some of these outfield players are going, because I think it's fair to say, once the trade deadline rolls around, and I know you want to talk about it, left-handed hitting second baseman, most certainly an outfielder at the same time. Once Yordan comes back, it's in that equation, it'll look a little bit different. But in right field, pleasantly surprised with Cam Smith and how he's transitioned to the outfield. You're pleasantly surprised with Jake Meyers. Jose Altuve is kind of turning a corner right now in his season in left field, but I still think you want a more established outfielder to join that mix as well at some point. But, sustainability, I think he's, can hold it on for, as much as he can for this season, especially when a guy like Chas McCormick is a little bit dwindling at times.
Is there a point that you would even consider moving Meyers to the 2-hole behind Pena because his speed, you might be able to take it more advantage of and maybe extend that lineup a little bit more so the power is kind of keeps going as the lineup goes along?
Yeah, I understand from that, that aspect. And, there's a lot of different feels to it. It's not the same, when Dusty was around either. And some guys live by a philosophy that you want your best hitter hitting second. I mean, you're protecting him from the leadoff spot, but you're also giving him probably the most at bats behind, whoever's going to be your leadoff hitter. I like the move that they've kind of done just with, Joe Spada kind of changing things up in these past couple of weeks in the last month. I don't necessarily know if that would be the best case, in my opinion. I think where he kind of, Jake best fits is maybe just in those bottom three, because you don't want to just load it up in the back end with guys that, depending on the night, whoever's in that starting nine, maybe some guys that are struggling offensively. And I think Jake just kind of gives you a nice, feel back there and almost like a support for that he hasn't been able to give you these last couple of years.
Cam Smith just called while you were talking, and he said, "I'm not struggling, buddy. I'm doing pretty darn good." Yainer Diaz has picked it up in May, but his at-bats must frustrate Espada. He doesn't like to actually swing a lot of strikes. And conversely, Caratini's at-bats are the total opposite. So, Kenny, when Yordan returns, can you see a semi-platoon at catcher? Because neither's looked good defensively. It's not looked all that fun back there. And I'm not sure it matters much with how this pitching staff holds runners, because I don't think the catchers can do much with it anyway.
Yeah, you look at it. I mean, even at the start of the season, it felt like everyone was kind of just running on Yainer Diaz, and that kind of plays into it. How much are they kind of fitting in that regard of trying to throw out runners, trying to manage the guys on the base paths. He's a guy that hit very well in the 2023 season, and that was his pretty much breakout campaign. Comes back the next year, slugging drops a little bit, but still hitting for average. I mean, that's what the guy's known for. I don't think it's very hard to change a guy's philosophy and approach when it was kind of working really well the last 2 years of not being, a chaser, but you get figured out. And I think that's one of the things that's going wrong for Yainer Diaz. Even looking at his baseball savant, he's in the second percentile in chase percentage. I mean, that is terrible. It's like, something that's has to be fixed. And you kind of just compare it to even like 2024, and it was the exact same thing. 2023, he was in the first percentile. So it's just one of those things where, he's continuing to chase, but he's not finding success when he is actually making contact with the ball. So that's, a big thing to kind of look at is, moving forward, this is a team that, started off really slow like it does every year, no matter who's on this lineup, whoever is on this roster. It's a team that, I don't want to say likes the slow start, but is notoriously known to, not really jump out ahead at the beginning of the season. When you're trying to make up ground at the same time with guys that are injured, I think it does behoove the Astros to kind of look at maybe a platoon if that's what it really comes to. You only have one left-handed bat one predominant left-handed bat when Yordan comes back. If you're trying to get a second one in there, maybe you do look at, switch hitting Caratini to platoon with it. And maybe Yainer Diaz kind of gets back into a spot where he can pick up first base starts at the same time. You're also looking at a team that's seeing success out of Christian Walker again. So a guy who just turned the corner too with all of his superstitions and coming on here with the mustache. Took me a couple days to grow it. Not maybe like his, but, it's a guy that's like a very mental game at that same spot. So, I think it would probably be something that they look at soon.
Yeah, don't get too excited about Christian Walker. I get scared every time somebody gets hit by a pitch because, they're fine. They leave them in the game. Okay. And then 2 days later, you're like, well, they're out for 3 months with a broken hand or something. The way the Astros luck has been with these really bizarre injuries. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the Tommy John stuff, but yeah, that scares me. And in just a couple of minutes, though, I want to ask you about one way this offense can seriously improve. But a quick reminder for all of our listeners that I want your Astros takes. Are we missing an angle? Is there a storyline getting ignored? Let me know in the YouTube comments. And for Rockets fans, I went through the Rockets' potential trade and free agent targets in our last couple of shows with Cooper Klein and Rooney Gaspar. Go check that out. And as always, support us and get updates on every show we drop by subscribing on YouTube. And definitely give us a quick thumbs up. It helps us out. Listen while you're driving, working out, or making dinner with your favorite podcast app. All right, Kenny, there is an offensive hole at second base. Brendan Rodgers can't hit, not really surprising. And I'm guessing the Astros brass would rather Mauricio Dubon be more of a utility player, and they'd prefer to leave Altuve in left field. So what's the latest on first-round pick Brice Matthews or other minor league options? Is there any hope that we've got somebody to help out there?
Yeah, one of the big things just about second base, and I think it's hard for some fan bases, some fans of just certain teams, for them to kind of come to the idea of this is that second base isn't like a true position anymore. Like you look at guys like Jose Altuve, I think for a fan base like that, you looked at a guy who's won an MVP, 2 World Series, has been a staple of this franchise, and then you kind of get hit with the idea, oh, wow, he's moving to the outfield. So now you have to kind of think about, is there another Jose Altuve in the system? No, not really. It's like guys that are just going to get moved around. And I think that's a positive when you look at a lot of these teams. And for a guy like Brice Matthews, he took like a knee to the head on a slide home recently and got sent into concussion protocol. So came back from that. He's only played in 2 games since, and 2 for 8 in that span, playing on the 25th and the 27th. So he played on Tuesday coming back from it. So he's looking good just offensively. And one of the big things that, just kind of worried me just about Brice Matthews was maybe, the holes in the swing when they drafted him out of Nebraska. And one of the biggest things is there were a lot of good, college hitters in that draft. And then they took like the last one. And if you look at like the breakdown of that 2023 draft, there was like a run of like 11 guys after that were either pitchers or just high schoolers. It was just like there was nothing in between. There was no other really college guys coming in that stretch because, it was just really top heavy at the top with some of those options. And Brice went 28th overall in that 2023 draft. And last year, up and down, he spent time on the injured list as well, really struggled when he got to AAA, only played in 12 games. He started off pretty well offensively this year at AAA, but now dipping below an 800 OPS at 737. And the slugging is, the biggest, worry when you're in the PCL, when your slugging number is below your on-base percentage. That's the one worry. 2 doubles, 2 triples, 4 homers this year. I don't think, he's necessarily there right now, especially when he's coming back just from a concussion protocol stint on the injured list. I think it'll maybe take some time. He's still a great runner, great fielder. I think the versatility is going to play a big part in getting him up to the big leagues. And when you look at, other options, just even in the top 30, because that's what people know, there's guys that are further away, like Chase Jaworski, who's at high A right now. A guy a lot of people know is still on the 40-man roster, and Shea Whitcomb. Is that offensive numbers that you've seen over the last couple months? It's kind of dipped a little bit, but 521 slugging at AAA. It didn't really translate in his short stint with the Astros last year in 20 games. So it's hard to think that it's going to happen again as he gets older and kind of gets used to AAA even more. So really just isn't like a concrete answer at second base, in my opinion, right now in the minor leagues. Right now, a lot of the Astros options are pitchers. There's a lot of pitchers, and like I said earlier, it's still not as top heavy as it was with outfielders as it was probably in 2022, 23 even. But it's a little bit more so that there's outfielders and pitchers at the top of the system.
Yeah, from what I saw when Whitcomb was in the majors last year, I believe in his offense. I don't believe in his defense. He didn't look good at third base, but I can't imagine he would look much better at second base. He just doesn't look like he would have much range there with the emphasis they're putting on defense in the infield. I just don't see him as a possibility. But let me throw out maybe a potential guy that could help him out. The Rays second baseman Brandon Lowe has a career. This is a career 1295 OPS in Daikin Park. He is a left-handed bat with a career 830 OPS versus righties. Last I checked, he makes $10.5 million this year, $11.5 million next year. Should the Astros deal for Lowe? And are there other options out there?
Yeah, I was looking at his numbers even when you sent me that a couple days ago, and the offensive numbers even gone up since you sent that. So I think one of the big things that's kind of lacking for him this year, maybe the walk category. I mean, his on base percentage is below 300 at the moment for 51 games. I think that's a little bit of a worry. But I think one of the big things that you've seen from the Astros is that they haven't like gone after, some big power bat or some, offensive, guy that's going to contribute or that they hope to can contribute and come in right away. You look at like the Trey Mancinis of the world, Christian Vasquez. I know there's more of a catching move as well in the last couple of years. And that was even a different general managing regime, but they haven't had guys that come in and just fit so well, right away at the trade deadline. And I think from the numbers you're saying, that's like, the perfect option. I know there's some other names that have kind of been thrown out there as well, just with some teams that are kind of dipping, but I think you'll get a better understanding once you get a little bit closer. And one of these big things you've seen just from the Astros front office, and there's been some guys and names that have rolled over just, as assistants in that front office, is that they find a lot of, under the radar guys that really just fit to the ballpark. Once you get to that back end of the season, you're trying to steal wins. And if you can get a guy in like Brandon Lowe that has numbers that work so well at Dyken Park, I think that would probably be your best option.
Yeah, I just would tend to ignore those numbers at the circus park that he plays in right now. I don't know how that's affecting him. Also, I just think, man, I kind of like his numbers being a little bit lower. Maybe he's off to a slow start because that will deaden the price a little bit to try to get him. The Astros don't have much to offer as far as minor league talent. So I was thinking about that as well. I also need you to prepare for a Robert rant, Kenny, because one of the things that has angered me over the last month is the shots fired at Dana Brown for his quote unquote roster building, because he didn't get lefty bats is what we're hearing and what I'm hearing all the time. And I want to blow this up because people like Chandler Rome have been spreading this false narrative. Look, he brought lefties Taylor Trammell, Ben Gamel, and Jacob Melton into camp, hoping they'd win jobs. Trammell and Melton got injured. Cam Smith and DeCenzo blew Gamel out of the water. Dana chose young talent over a journeyman fifth outfielder in Gamel. Could you imagine if they had kept Gamel up to start the season instead of Cam Smith? I think there would have been a riot. They would have come at him with pitchforks at Dyken Park as soon as Dana Brown showed up. He went after switch hitting second baseman Jorge Polanco and took a lot of crap from some Astros fans for considering that option in the offseason. He was outbid by the Mariners. Polanco's OPS right now, as you and I speak, is 893. Is anybody complaining about right-handed hitting Paredes, a guy that he picked up this offseason? Was anybody complaining about Christian Walker this winter, the best first baseman on the market that the Astros picked up? And by the way, Jake Meyers, who not typically great OPS against righties, this year his OPS is 785. You're not platooning Altuve or Cam. And outside of the second baseman, who were you pinch hitting for as a lefty late in games? What lefties are you pinch hitting for of those guys? I'm not pinch hitting for Altuve. I'm not pinch hitting for the red hot Jake Meyers. I just don't get it, Kenny. What else was Dana Brown supposed to do here?
Yeah, I think one of the big things that people probably wanted was, a left-handed hitting guy with options. You look at this team, there weren't many, open roster spots coming the year, but a little bit more than years past. There just weren't many guys out there that you could probably trade for, land, sign to a minor league deal and hope that, that you can add him to the 40-man and then just option him at some point, or, whatever the trajectory or just thought process behind it. But I think when you look at the 40-man roster, there's just no really lefty options, but there's a lot of fringe spots. You talk about the Brendan Rodgers, who hasn't been hitting well, even a guy like Kennedy Corona, who they added a couple years ago. I mean, offensively, he's fallen off. He's not even ranked anymore in some of these prospects. He's not even, an offensive threat, really. So there's spots. I mean, there's opportunities for lefty bats to join that 40-man roster. And I just don't think the answer is really in the minor leagues right now. I think that's one big thing that maybe a lot of people can maybe get a little bit frustrated with, but, there really just isn't many options down there in the minor leagues that can come up and be that lefty bat. Jacob Melton, is still trying to figure it out at AAA and playing consistently. He's only played in 14 games this year. He had a minor quad injury early in the season. So, still trying to put all that together. But behind him, like I said, there's a lot of, pitchers, and right-handed bats that are just in that mix. Luis Baez coming back from a development list stint. He's at AA, but there's not really many lefty options. And I think that's one of the big kind of worries for this roster, because when you get a guy that goes down like Yordan Alvarez, your only one lefty option is your backup catcher. So, and I know Cesar Salazar is up as well as another guy off the bench, but I think that's where the frustration kind of goes. Is just there's not many opportunities for guys to come up and and replace maybe production that you're losing. And it's, you're not going to ideally replace anyone or replace Yordan Alvarez with anyone in your minor leagues. But I think that's where the frustration kind of brews for some people.
Yeah. I mean, Brendan Rodgers, if you want to complain about that, okay. Maybe they could have found somebody better than Brendan Rodgers, but he's a veteran. They wanted somebody that could play some defense. And like I said, he wanted Polanco. That was going to be the guy that was supposed to work. And it's not so easy sometimes to find the right guys. And Dana Brown has been plugging holes on the Titanic for the last couple of years. I mean, starter after starter going down, the bullpen, he's found gems in the bullpen. Ort. Who's Ort? Who's some guy named Ort that's doing all this stuff? I mean, he's found guys like, that just have worked out magically for the Astros for almost no cost. So get off of Dana Brown's back. I'm just tired of it. And let me remind you again, Cam Smith and Paredes. That's who we got for Kyle Tucker. And, hopefully Wisniewski comes back and can be something as well. But that's pretty darn good for a guy that had 1 year left on his contract. You might have a future superstar in Cam Smith. So one of the things that we talked about earlier in the show was the starting pitching issues. And I want to ask you about a few of the guys that you covered in the minor leagues. Ryan Gusto has 12 appearances, 6 starts, 4.58 ERA, 1.53 WHIP. But if you take out one terrible start, and I know you can't do that, but you take out one terrible start, his ERA is 3. What's the good and the bad from Gusto so far?
Yeah, that's something I did with a couple of his starts when he was in the minor leagues. And I think that's where you kind of go with it, where sometimes, he kind of has one of these blow up outings, that kind of just pop up. But the one good is that, he's not letting a move from the bullpen to the rotation, depending on where they need him, really affect him mentally. One of the biggest things I picked up on Gusto when I talked to him over these last couple of years is that he just wanted the opportunity. That's all he was chasing, forever. He didn't make his high school team once. He didn't really have many opportunities coming out of high school either. A lot of colleges overlooked him, didn't really give him a shot. One of the biggest things is he just wanted to be on the mound. It was a big thing for Gusto. And a lot of it is just working on feel, and it'll come with time too. Those numbers will go up and down just depending. And if you race that May 12th start against Kansas City, like you said, I mean, it's a pretty much a good year. One I guess thorn I would throw at Gusto right now is walks. It's just he has more walks than strikeouts this month, 10-9. It's not something you ever want to see. And there's a 3.25 average against him, and that's pretty much heavily weighted by that start against the Royals where he gave up 7 hits. But at the same time, I think that's the one thing is just allowing base runners, because sometimes he can get out of it. Even in some of his relief appearances, he's kind of worked around some stuff and giving up inherited runners. But one of the biggest things right now is for him is just limiting guys on base. And some of these older pitchers have come up through the Astros system. There's even some relievers right now, and in AAA for them have for some reason been better when guys are on base. And I think that just plays into the mental aspect for some of them. But at the same time, I think that's one of the thorns for Ryan Gusto right now is really just limiting base runners.
The lefty Colton Gordon has 3 starts, none of them disasters, 3 earned runs allowed in each, but opponents are batting .302. The ERA is an ugly 5.52 because he's averaging less than 5 innings an outing. That's what really hurts it. The good news, Kenny, is he's only given up 2 walks. You talked about Gusto. He's had control.
Yeah, for Colton Gordon too, as he started to climb the system more and more and kind of got a feel for his repertoire and what he was kind of working with, he was never a guy that was going to be working with a high 90s fastball. He's lefty. A lot of his stuff is finesse. He's just trying to get into the zone, and a lot of it is trying to steal strikes. And that kind of just comes with, not walking a lot of guys and trying to pepper the zone a little bit. And with that, comes hits, and he's a soft throwing lefty. What's the majority of major league hitters? They're right-handed. So it's, it's probably right in their wheelhouse of what they like. And it'll come with time too. They figure out guys on pretty early. You look at AJ Blubaugh too, his first outing, his major league outing. Some of those runs weren't earned, but, still kind of a rough first appearance in an Astros uniform to a certain extent. But at the same time with Colton, it's really just kind of getting that feel and treating it like it's not anything different. I think that's one big thing he kind of always talked about. And, no matter where he is, he's just pitching on a mound. And I think he has a good head on his shoulders and the way he can control that. It's a lot of the mental aspect too for Colton Gordon. And, I don't think he'll ever be like a really high strikeout guy. His, career high right now is 7 5 1/3. But one of the bigger things that he was able to do these last two years at AAA was eat innings. And that's exactly what I think you want him to do. You're not going to expect a 2.45 ERA from Colton Gordon in the future. You want him to come out and give you, 5 to 7 innings every single night. And I think that's possible. He's a guy that likes to throw strikes. That's an example of those lower end walk numbers. And I think with that, you're just going to give it off to the best bullpen in baseball at the moment.
Blubaugh just had the 1 start, 4 innings, 2 earned runs, 5 hits. How much potential do you see with him?
Yeah, with AJ, it starts to dip a little bit more once you see guys repeat AAA. And I think with any other system, even with a team that's been beat up by starting pitching injuries, you maybe expect it to be in the majors a little bit longer. One of those big things about AJ is, and I've texted this to Jimmy before, he pitches angry sometimes. And he's probably one of the nicest guys you'll ever meet just in the Astros system and just with the way he carries himself. The numbers this year at AAA, they aren't vintage AJ Blubaugh, if I can use that term. 6.05 ERA right now and 269 opponents are batting against him, and a 1.71 whip is, the concern. But walk numbers are up a little bit. But with AJ too, this is a system that believes in him. I mean, they sent him to the futures game over anyone else. He hit 97 over the offseason. One of the big things I talked to Jimmy is that I don't think that's necessarily something he can hold, through an entire start or even hold deep into the season, but he does have it in his back pocket. So if there's opportunities for him in short relief, you're going to see a guy with a lot of tools in his bag and a fastball that he can tick up pretty high. So I think there's still opportunities for AJ kind of deep into the season, even with injuries to the starting rotation and more guys kind of joining this 40-man roster. There will still be, more starts for him coming up, I bet.
So the Astros starters, you got Hunter, Fromber. You hope Eric Getty's going to be back within the next month. And then Lance McCullers keeps it up. Which one of these guys is the best option as a 5th starter? Which one do you think is going to work out most this year?
I'm between Guston and Gordon right now. I think Guston will give you a little bit more consistency. They're 2 guys that can eat innings. And I think that out of that 5th spot, you've seen in the last couple of years with someone like Brandon Bielak or even Yainer-Caratini, I think at times was kind of ticking into the 5, 6, 7 range. It starts just depending on when he was healthy and where he was in the rotation. I still think there's an opportunity to go out there and get a starter as well. I don't know how many people are kind of in that boat, but this is a team that's already dealt with a bunch of injuries. They don't know when Javier is coming back. They don't have a specific timetable on him, and that's probably going to be way down the line from when we're talking right now. I still think they probably should shop maybe for another major league arm. One of the biggest things you hear Dana Brown say all the time is that, you can never have enough pitching depth. I think one of the biggest things, I can hear Dana Brown's voice. One of the biggest things I can always hear is pitching. I can hear him saying that word in my head right now. And I think, for him, maybe there is another starter out there that they're kind of going after right now. But right now I would lean Guston until Eric Getty comes back. And they'll probably push Gordon back down to the minors, just keep him stretched out at AAA. And that's pending if everyone is healthy in that rotation moving forward.
You kind of live in this Astros bubble, Kenny, where it's we're just paying attention to our team. But you look at the Astros over the last couple of years and you've had 5 Tommy John surgeries. And that's, I don't think that includes the JP France injury, which I Bleav was not a Tommy John situation. But is that unusual for starting pitching on other teams? I mean, we're having an issue, or is this league wide?
I think it's an issue. But I also I was talking to someone the other day. I kind of heard some rumblings that it was going to be Tommy John. And I think everyone was kind of assuming it too for Ronald Blanco a couple of days ago. And, I asked, I was like, is this just an issue with just the training team, the training staff? Are they just not preparing these guys? And they said it's just something that's going to hit the league pretty hard soon. It was something that's going to be facing everyone. I know a lot of people will like to complain about pitching, caps on some of these starters in the minor leagues, even guys that come up to the major leagues. I don't know if the Astros are really in that boat of, capping some of their guys, but even a couple of weeks ago, there was a pitcher at AA. His name is Jonathan. He threw 99 pitches. He was 1 out away from a perfect game. And it was 7-inning contest, but still 1 out away. The Mets wouldn't let him throw. They were like, no, this is bigger than a perfect game in the minor leagues. This is development. So you'll see that, a lot more. They put guys on the injured list and in the White Sox system, and they're not necessarily injured. They're just giving them a time off because they're trying to get into this part of, baseball and professional baseball where they don't want you just pitching through the summer. They want you pitching into September and October, no matter, how old you are, no matter at what point in your development is. But I think for the Astros, it's kind of a kind of epidemic, just of what's going on right now. Because go back in time 3 years ago in 2022, I think I read Chandler Rome wrote one time, and I don't want to, quote him on this, or I think it was him, the Astros and the Orioles were 2 teams that just had the least amount of like injured list guys the entire year. It was a team that, I know the 2022 team is, uncomparable to what the team is right now, but that was a team that just was, perfect almost. Like guys just weren't getting injured at a high rate. But right now it just feels like it's a accumulation of just pitching a lot. And I think with Hayden Wesneski too, it's one of those things where he was, in and out as a starter last year, and you kind of throw him into the fire as a starter again. And thing he kind of struggled with was with the Cubs was, going deep and outing without an uptick in that in his pitch count. And I think maybe that's an accumulation of something. And Ronald Blanco at the same time came in as a starter last year, and you come in again this year, probably with that workload you're putting on a guy who's in his early 30s, it can be tasking on someone too. So I think it's just kind of the workload that they're putting on pitchers these days.
A couple of things. And on Blanco, he would pitch in the winter. They didn't want him pitching in the winter this time around, but you wonder if that affected him because it gets him out of his routine. Maybe it affected his arm because he had to ramp back up, which he hadn't had to do. He's not somebody that throws a lot of breaking pitches. So I just found it weird that happened. Wisniewski has the big breaking pitch. So there's that. But I keep saying this, Kenny, I keep going back to this. In 2022, you mentioned 2022. It's a good thing you did because you go back there, the Astros won the World Series. They pitched a week into November. It's the latest a Major League Baseball season has ever lasted, and I think in history. And then you go from that to 3 guys from that roster go play in the World Baseball Classic the following year in March. There's not a big spring training for the World Baseball Classic. It's like all of a sudden you're pitching stressful World Series like innings in March. And what has happened to these 3 Astros pitchers? Their careers, it feels like, are over with. We saw Urquidy and Luis Garcia 3 games into the season need Tommy John surgery. Season over with. Javier never looked the same that year. He pitched, but you could tell the whole year something was off. That off season, or I think it might have been in spring, they shut him down. And those 3 guys, until they come back, I just kind of felt like that ruined their career. I can't imagine that in the NFL. I can't imagine the NFL putting up with, okay, the season ends in, let's say, April, and instead of going to camp, you're going to be playing in what is basically a Super Bowl in August. It just wouldn't happen. And next year, we got another World Baseball Classic, Kenny. We got another one coming up. And if I'm the Astros, I am like begging and pleading to all my pitchers, I don't want you pitching in this. Look the devastation that has done to our team and to this franchise.
I think you do look at, next year's as well in the 2026. I don't really know how many starters might be, on the radar for some of these teams. I think Hunter Brown would probably be in that mix, maybe for the United States. But guys like Javier, like you're talking about, Javier, Luis Garcia, if they're back in throwing by that time and, back in a competitive section of their careers, I don't necessarily see them doing it. I think you're kind of, spot on. And one of the big things, the WBC means a lot to a lot of these guys. And it's a lot of, more than just, the future of baseball, they want to put on for their country, and it's a big deal. I mean, I kind of have a solution for it, and I want to hear your thoughts on it, Rob, but maybe they just, carve out, 2 weeks in the summer, turn it almost into the all-star game where you kind of give some guys some downtime and you let them compete then. So it's like at the height of the season and guys are in full swings, and just allow them to play then and carve it out then rather than in their ramp up time during spring training.
Anything is better than what they're doing right now, because I think it's a big mistake. It wasn't just the Astros lost 3 pitchers' careers, but they also lost, if you remember, Altuve for like 2 months because he got hit on the hand. I mean, that's the risk that you would take of putting it in the summer. It's the same risk that you're putting it in March. Like you're not starting the season with guys. You could screw up a guy. You could do a ton more damage to pitchers because you're doing this without the necessary ramp. There's a reason, there is a reason why there is a 1 month or 6 week, whatever it is now, spring training. There's a reason that pitchers report early. That is a thing for a reason. So these guys can ramp up and have more extra time to do that so they don't get hurt. So it's better for their arm. And I'm like, yeah, the way it's going, it doesn't work. And I know Major League Baseball might hate the idea, but we just saw the NBA say, we're going to take a week off here for the NBA Cup. It's not an international thing. A lot of those games counted towards the standings, but at the same time, they looked at it as, hey, this is a way for more people to get into baseball in a dead part of the year.
Yeah, and even then, I mean, I think you're expanding the season, giving guys some time off that maybe they don't get in a regular year, and maybe you break it up even more. I mean, I know we're kind of tailing off of the Astros talk here, but what if they do like a part at the start of June and then you play at the end of July? You kind of get some of those pool games out of the way early, give some guys some time off. You push, the postseason maybe into the second week of November, and maybe start the next year a little bit later. You're just trying to, still play into the part of, player safety and making sure these guys aren't getting hurt, but also giving them an opportunity to play in something they also love. That's not just Major League Baseball, but also playing for the country on their chest, the one that they're from. I think there's a lot of, thoughts that go into it, but I don't think they'll be able to figure that out before next year. So it will just be interesting to see, from this roster, who from this system will be looking to join some of those teams in 2026.
And here's something else that you can think of, Kenny, and this is something that I believe in. I've always wanted this split season. I go back when I was a kid, there was a split season that the Astros had back in '81 where they go to a playoff situation because of a strike season. They turned it into a split season. I can't remember if it was a strike or a lockout, but it just makes sense to get more teams involved. So if you're a bad team that, you got to reset. Maybe stuff went bad in the early part of the season. You get a reset the second half of the season. And, if you have a split season, there you go. You put that 2-week period for the WBC in the middle. And so you have all of this sort of playoff action. You have the end of the first part of the season where teams are fighting for a potential playoff and winning that part of the season. And you go straight into the 2-week of the WBC. And then you come out of that and it's like opening day for a lot of teams. It's like, yeah, we're starting at zero again.
That might help with the competitive aspect too. I think just with baseball as a whole, you see a lot of teams that just kind of come out of the season, started the season with no real hopes of, winning. Their whole idea is just put the guys out there that are there. And I think with your idea, that probably does help with the competitive aspect too.
And it lines up too, where you can put the All-Star break maybe as that 2-week period. And then at the end of the 2-week WBC, you had to have the All-Star game weekend or whatever. So you just make it into this whole long thing. It's a whole celebration of baseball for like 3 or 4 weeks. I mean, I just think, yeah, that's a good idea. And just, yeah, I'd love to hear what everybody thinks out there that's listening. And also, Kenny, it's at the Vandalorian, of course, on X. What's exciting and new over at Astros Future?
You're kind of in a slow spot right now, trying to find some guys that are, excelling that we haven't already talked to bring on the podcast. We might dip into some old players here soon. There's some guys that we're trying to line up interviews with. So maybe get a perspective on what the minor leagues used to look like, what prospect development used to look like, even like 70s, 80s, 90s, and can kind of compare it to now. Because in a kind of a slower spot right now in the system, but guys start to figure things out, we'll start to have a little bit more interviews going on in the podcast.
And you've also got your other stuff that you've got going. You got the Mizzou podcast as well. And I'm blanking. What else are you working on these days?
Yeah, I'm still at Rivals right now. It's my full-time job, but covering Mizzou recruiting, football, going to kind of move away from basketball here soon once we get purchased by On3, less than a month now. So I'm kind of just focusing on football recruiting and back in St. Louis, actually, but got the blueprints of Minute Maid Park right there, actually.
Yeah, it's good to see some of that up in the St. Louis area, of course. And I went to school at Mizzou and been to St. Louis a bunch of times, got some friends up there. So love that area. Good people up there as well. As always, can't thank you enough for doing it. Appreciate the time, man.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
You're listening to Houston Sports Talk.
Hey, don't forget to support us by subscribing and commenting on YouTube. You can always listen to us on Spotify, Apple, or your favorite podcast app. Tell your friends about us and share our show links on social media. Spread the word, everybody. Thanks for listening.